I'm going to do a very classic streamer and content creator thing, and that is I'm going to complain about the way I've died in Warzone. Now, yes, this video comes with a very large dose of irony and a very moderate dose of self-awareness, but I wanted to talk about this today because I think it's something that the majority of players are experiencing, but don't actually know about. It's like this weird little secret within Warzone that just doesn't make a huge amount of sense, and unless somebody explains it to you, you probably would never have noticed it in the game. Today I had a couple of fights in Warzone where I lost some gunfights that honestly just made no sense to me. Now, I am a streamer, and that means 9 times out of 10 when I die, I will be moderately salty anyway, even if it looks like I'm smiling through the pain. And part of that job is not moaning and complaining every single time I die, which I sometimes fail at and sometimes do well at, but also part of it is understanding the game you play and why things work certain ways. Because if I want to improve and I want to make better content and win more matches and make my streams more interesting generally, I need to understand what I'm doing wrong. But this is something that the game is doing wrong. And I wanted to talk about in this video today because I reckon once I mention it, it's going to make a world's worth of sense and you guys will let me know in the comment section down below. And if you could drop a like on this video, that would be appreciated too. Now, you may have missed it, but when Call of Duty released Modern Warfare 3 and also the new version of Warzone, they changed the fundamental way that Call of Duty approached damage models with the vast majority of their weapons in the game. And the idea was that they were going to make the damage models more uniform, meaning that the damage was the same in more locations, to make the game feel a little bit more consistent in terms of time to kill. To explain how this works, if you think about an SMG with a really fast fire rate in Warzone, if you hit fire somebody with an SMG, some of those bullets are going to hit them in the legs, some in the chest, some in the head, but if you're unlucky, there'll be some instances where hip firing that SMG and landing a bunch of really random headshots completely changes the time to kill experience. In one instance, your hip fire might get a couple of rounds in a few different locations and take a certain amount of time, but in another instance, you might accidentally get lots of hip fire kills to the head and kill somebody in half the speed. And it created a very inconsistent experience where certain weapons and certain weapon categories would sometimes be super effective and sometimes be super terrible. And the gap in inconsistency meant that if you were on the receiving end of one of those weapons, you would also have a super inconsistent experience where sometimes it felt like you got melted instantly, and other times it felt like it took them forever to try and kill you. So the concept of flattening the damage model in Warzone was just a simple way of making sure that the time to kill from weapon to weapon felt more uniform. And that worked and makes perfect sense for Warzone to a certain extent. It's actually a really solid idea that, especially in the SMG category, reduces the randomness of certain gunfights and make things feel a little bit more consistent. There are so many guns in Warzone with really high rates of fire, so many of them with a lot of hip-fire accuracy in the SMG category, and hundreds if not thousands upon thousands of instances where one player happens to hip-fire his gun, gets very lucky, lands 3 or 4 headshots, and you've been instantly deleted. This idea also makes sense for how weapon damage works for shooting at an opponent who's shooting back at you. If you make the chest damage the same as the arms, if that person is aiming directly at you and they're facing you front on, and you hit them in the arms, you would be expecting the bullet to go through their arms and deal chest damage as opposed to arm damage. So having the same damage model for the limbs and also the upper torso makes perfect sense, and the vast majority of weapons in the current version of Warzone have the same damage for the chest as they do for the upper arms and the lower arms to mitigate this problem and make the gunplay feel more consistent. But this is where things go a little bit wrong, because in flattening the time to kill and making weapons feel quote-unquote more consistent, they've also inadvertently created a lot of anomalies. And this occurred to me today when I was in a gunfight with somebody on a rooftop, and I fired bullets that were uniformly to the chest and to the head, and I lost a gunfight to somebody who only shot me in the lower body and also the legs and feet. And there are so many instances of this, and in fact, I bet you as I'm saying this right now, you guys are thinking of all of the different gunfights you've had in the game where somebody shoots you directly in the toes and somehow ends up winning that gunfight. It's a very strange phenomenon that happens more often than I think people realize, and as somebody who plays the game for 5-6 hours a day as a full-time job, it's something I notice over and over again, where my torso and headshots have been absolutely nothing in the equation to certain gunfights. And the reason why is because in flattening the damage model for all of these guns, Call of Duty's actually made the mistake of making the damage models too uniform. Let me give you an example. The current most popular SMG in the game right now is probably the HRM9. And you would think if somebody hits you in the head or the chest, they would get substantially more damage than if they hit you in the legs. That's not the case with the HRM9. The stomach damage model, the lower legs, and the feet is 31 damage per bullet. The upper arms, the lower arms, and the chest is 32 damage, and the head is 35. So whilst there's a small bonus for getting a headshot of 3 damage, it makes practically no difference whether you hit somebody in the feet or if you hit them in the chest. And that is conceptually a huge problem in Warzone. And this problem is pretty much universal across all of the weapon categories, with some weapons having very strange damage models that don't make a huge amount of sense. For example, if you look at the Ram 9, which is another popular SMG right now, it's 36 damage for a headshot, which is a little bit of a bonus. And again, the bonus for SMGs can't be too high because of hip firing, random headshots when hip firing at close range, so on and so forth. But the difference between shooting somebody in the toes and shooting somebody in the chest is 33 damage to 30 damage. A 3 damage difference with a high rate of fire weapon at close range, which just means that ultimately it makes no difference. You shouldn't bother aiming for the chest. You shouldn't bother aiming for central mass, and if you can shoot them pretty much anywhere, chances are you'll win the fight. Now, for the SMG category, some of that makes perfect sense. Low headshot multipliers make perfect sense, but having toe damage be the same as torso damage, or within spitting distance, doesn't make sense to the vast majority of people. But the problem as well is that this extends to other weapon categories, and some guns make sense and others just don't. The MTZ-556 as an assault rifle, for example, has been fairly popular recently, and the reason why is because it does 27 damage to the chest, the upper legs, and the arms, but does 25 damage to the toes. Once again iterating that shooting these people in the feet is a 2 damage difference per bullet. And you might be thinking, well, if this is the case for the majority of weapons, then that makes sense, because it's consistent, it's uniform, and now everybody knows that headshots aren't really worth it, and certain guns aren't really worth using in that category or being more accurate with. And in fact, there are certain weapons in the game where being more accurate practically makes no difference. But the problem with Warzone is that the inconsistency comes because there are weapons that follow a more logical sense of damage. The Ram 7 right now is the most popular assault rifle in the game, and the Ram 7 has a perfectly sensible damage model. It's 46 damage to the head, which is 10 more damage than you would get for the chest, upper arms, and upper legs, and 32 damage to the feet and lower legs. Meaning for this weapon, there are actually substantial differences for landing a headshot versus a chest shot. And whilst there's only a 4 damage difference between the chest and the legs, the fact that there's a 10 damage difference between the chest and the head kind of offsets that problem. And this is a logical formula. I would expect a headshot to kill somebody drastically faster than a chest or headshot. So you get that inconsistency because some guns seem to follow the thing you would expect, the common sense law that headshots and chest shots are worth more and shooting people in the toes are worth less. But then other weapons are the complete inverse of that, and the damage between the legs and the toes and the arms and the chest are pretty much the same thing. But this gets even more wild because there are other guns where the damage model just makes no sense at all. For example, the Taka Volva has a 58 damage to the head, 58 damage to the neck, 58 damage to the chest, but then a 49 damage to the stomach, but a 58 damage to the upper arms, and a 54 damage to the lower arms, and a 49 damage to the upper legs, and a 45 damage to the lower legs. So the damage model for this LMG is literally all over the place, where a headshot is worth just as much as shooting somebody in the shoulder. And this just introduces more randomness and more things that don't make a huge amount of sense in the way that Warzone operates, and it creates a very confusing environment where gunfights feel really inconsistent and random, because in some gunfights, you're getting the benefits of being more accurate, and in other gunfights, there are absolutely no benefits to being more accurate. And because this is so radical between certain weapons and certain categories, you get this really inconsistent experience that, in my view, is just as bad as the inconsistent experience from before they flattened the damage model, where SMGs were deleting people in 0.5 seconds and then in other instances taking 2 to 3 times as long. To me, the solution is very clear. Now, I totally understand having the upper arms and the arms have the same damage model as the chest, because it just makes sense, especially when somebody's aiming at you. If you are shooting at somebody who's aiming at you and you happen to hit them in the arms that are in front of the character model's chest, you would expect to do chest level damage. But it doesn't make sense to me that the lower stomach, the lower legs and upper legs have fairly uniform models as well. And I would expect all weapons, regardless of their category, to do substantially less damage to the lower legs, the toes, and the upper legs than the rest of the body. And that isn't the case at the moment. Not only would this make the gunplay experience drastically more consistent in Warzone, it would also greatly increase the current skill gap in the game, because there are so many instances where players are just happening to shoot somebody in the feet and ending up beating people who are shooting them in the chest and head. Now yes, I am fully aware I am doing the classic streamer thing of dying randomly to a certain instance and making it my life's mission to make Raven Software change something. I'm somewhat more self-aware than you would quite expect a streamer to be, and I understand that that's something that pretty much all of us do, and I can be a salty geezer sometimes. I don't stray away from that. But I genuinely think this is a problem that actually is problematic for the vast majority of players, and only now has it been illustrated on this video have some of you probably realized that you've lost a lot of gunfights to things that just haven't made a huge amount of sense. So if you found this video useful, please leave a like. Drop a comment down below, let me know your thoughts and feelings, and of course, feel free to share it with your friends. As always, folks, thank you for watching, and I'll catch you in the next one.